I think we're just welcome to hear you.
Thank you very much, Ginger. Well, once again, thank you very much for having me. I'm really privileged to be here, and I have to thank a person who is not present here, Barbara Lakeberg. I mean, she's been instrumental to have this meeting and to be here today, so I'm really grateful to her. I had a Skype chat with her 2 days back, and that was the first time that actually we met each other face to face, electronically, right? Before that, we went through emails. So a word of thanks for her and for you and for David for having me. Thank you very much. I'm Kawa Hassan. I'm from 2 countries. I'm from Holland, where I've been living since 1992, and I'm also from Iraq, Kurdistan region, where I was born and raised till 1991. I fled Iraq in 1991 as a refugee, arrived in Holland in 1992. Studied at the University of Amsterdam, did political science. After that, I worked for Dutch media during the Iraq war. In 2003, I covered the coverage of Arabic-speaking and English-speaking channels on the war in Iraq, and I worked for a Dutch NGO on peace building. After that, that was 2004, I went to Sri Lanka. I worked in Sri Lanka for 3.5 years for UNDP, UN. 2 years for UNDP, and after that for 1.5 years for a Swedish-Norwegian NGO called Forut, which has a headquarters in Bergen in Norway. I worked in the northeast of Sri Lanka, where the Tamil Tigers were based, coordinating, managing programs for what they call post-conflict recovery, post-tsunami projects. And after that, I went back to Holland. I thought after 3.5 years it's been really great experience, and now I go back to Holland even if it's raining there, which is the case almost every day. So after going back to Holland, I worked for a while, for 6 months, for a Dutch NGO called Simavi. I coordinated a health and water science project in Asia. And after that, I joined Hivos, for which I've been working since November 2008. I coordinate the research program, which, as I said in the beginning, it's a think tank within an NGO. It's got a very unique position because usually being an NGO, you are an activist organization. So we have a very unique program. It's called a knowledge program, which is a research program. And we do research. We write publications. We write about Middle East and North Africa, which is our focus. But we also work with think tanks in the West and in Middle East. We write about transitions, revolutions, the work and the role of donors in supporting the transition process in the Middle East. I've come to the US. I've been invited by Atlantic Council in Washington. I gave a talk last week on this paper as part of an overall discussion on the role of EU and US towards the transitions in the region. I had meetings at State Department. I met with National Endowment for Democracy, State Department think tank. So now I'm in New York. This morning I had a meeting with the head of UN DEF, that's UN Democracy Fund. And tomorrow I'm going back to Holland. That's just in a very brief overview. Who am I? Why am I here? So that you have an idea who's this guy sitting in front of us and giving us this presentation, right?
Exactly.
So going back to the main aim of this meeting with you, we were in discussion through emails. What should I present? What are your interests? And then you gave me an excellent list of topics, and I thought, well, maybe it's since I have the privilege to choose.
Yes.
So I have to make use of that, and I thought, maybe it's just interesting to just very briefly discuss my latest paper, which I also discussed this morning with the UN and also in Washington with the Atlantic Council. It's the title is Dignity, Revolutions and Western Donors, Redefining Relevance. It's a briefing note. It's a kind of vision paper for my organization, Hivos, and I wrote this in response to changes in Middle East after the eruption of revolutions in Middle East. We thought at Hivos, what does it mean to us? Where do we stand in the middle of all these revolutionary changes? And more widely, what does it mean for the international community, for the international donor community? So I struggled for 6 months to just try to think about the theme and try to I mean, just to set up a kind of an outline for my paper, and it's really, it was really a struggle. And finally, after a lot of discussions with my colleagues, I arrived at the idea of dignity revolutions and Western donors. And for me, why really finding relevance? Because I think these changes in Middle East, the revolutionary changes, they affect all I mean, they have huge impacts for international actors, including UN, including NGOs like Hivos. Why? I think because they redefine the entire state-society relations in Middle East, and they redefine our thinking about the region. And I think the main findings of the paper is that, I mean, before the revolution, very shortly, the main compelling analysis about Middle East from the West was that the societies are weak, states are strong, and we have to go to the Middle East, we international community, EU, US, NGOs, and promote democracy. That's the word, democracy promotion, still used in some NGO international circles, which I think is no longer relevant. I will say later on just a bit about that, why I think that it is irrelevant. So, in short, weak societies, strong states, there is no civic culture, there is no civil society. We need to promote democracy, with all good intentions, of course. That was the overall analysis, compelling narrative about Middle East. And then suddenly, you know, Ben Ali is gone, Mubarak is gone, the guy of Yemen is gone, Gaddafi is no longer there, Assad is on the list, and who knows who will follow suit. Something radically was happening, and out of the blue, and you know, so I thought, you know, wow, I mean, this is unbelievable. That's why I chose the subheading, why did we not see it coming? And I thought for three main reasons. One is that we overstated state as, you know, the main instrument of, I mean, you know, that state is strong, and the authoritarian state is very strong, and there is stability, particularly from the views of the US government and EU. As long as there was so-called stability, then state is strong. So in our analysis about Middle East and social changes, we overstated state as an actor. Next to that, we understated society and social actors to bring about change. And thirdly, we ignored, overlooked, we didn't see the relation between different factors, social factors, political factors. We didn't see the interrelation between gender as what I call the gender revolution. For the last 50 years, you know, the increase of girls in schools, universities, with all its impacts for the rethinking of the individual agency in the society. We didn't see that. So three main factors which formed actually our thinking narrative about the region. And these three factors were actually the basis of what has been in the very famous narrative. It's called Arab exceptionalism, which means that the Arabs, Muslims, I mean, it's called Arab exceptionalism, but it's being applied also to to Muslims in general. That they are, I mean, it's because of the culture of religion that they don't strive for democracy. That's why they have authoritarian regimes, and they are Arab exceptionalism, right? So how could we clarify that, in such a short period of time all these revolutions happened? So something apparently went wrong in the analysis, right? So, and which means that there is a need for rethink about the region, state-society relations, and we need to engage in two paradigm shifts. The first one is from Arab exceptionalism to what I call Tahrir Square Republic, Tahrir Square in Cairo. And secondly is the whole idea shift from democracy promotion to accompanying changes, which are two different things. We need to accompany changes. We don't promote democracy. We never did, as a matter of fact. And you don't promote democracy. There should be a culture receptive for that, to strive for that, because even unintentionally it's got a kind of a paternalistic notion to it, right? Having said that, we should not idealize nor romanticize the new assertive societies. These are tough transitions, tough challenges are ahead. And revolutions are by their very nature, for most of the time, destructive. But where there are no options for reforms, revolutions come in. And we've seen that in Libya. We see that daily in Syria, Bahrain. We should not, I am very passionate about it, but I would like to caution not to romanticize it. Which means that as Western donors, there is a need for us we are still relevant, but to remain relevant, we need to be strategic. And to be strategic, we need to have sophisticated analysis about what is going on right now in the region and in the future. We need advanced analysis, and for that, my main point of the talk is that we need to have really regional authentic knowledge about what is going on in the region. And how could we get that? We can get that through real partnership with think tanks in the region who produce knowledge. Which brings me to what I call 6 strategic principles. That is, first and foremost, whose knowledge counts. So far, the knowledge production between West and North and South, when it comes to issues of democracy, human rights, is still North-based, right? So the knowledge production is still asymmetric. We should rethink that. There should be more. We should engage in think tanks, in researchers of the region to write about their region from their perspectives. But we should not, and this is important, we should not substitute Orientalism with Occidentalism. There is also kind of misperceptions and prejudices in the region about West. Neither are correct.
Right.
So we should not substitute Orientalism for Occidentalism. Where possible, we need to bring these 2 parts of the world together by really engaging in a real, honest knowledge production, right? Secondly is what I call dynamic demand-driven context analysis, and that, for that matter, what I mean is that things in the region, they move very fastly, and even for somebody like, I follow on a daily basis the news in the world through Arab media, Arabic media, Kurdish media, my mother tongue, English, but at the end of the day, I ask myself, wow, this is too much to handle, this is too much to understand. Changes which usually take decades have been compressed to years and sometimes even to days. So it's just too complex to understand what is going on there. So as a donor, you need to have a dynamic demand-driven context analysis. You need to update your analysis of the region continuously. And thirdly, being an NGO, policymakers, those who are engaged in support to democracy, we need to show to our back donors quick impact. That's how it is. But that is very difficult to show. Anyhow, it's difficult to show impact within 4 years, where you have a program for 4 years, and to show to back donors that, this is what I achieved. It doesn't simply work like that. But again, it's part of how, the whole support to human rights, like advocacy group work, that is, we need to show impacts, but again, reality is much, much more stubborn. So what I think is that what we need is what I call strategic patience in a rapidly changing context. And patience, policy and patience and programs and patience don't go always together. It's difficult being a policymaker or an activist. Because we as activists, we say, what can we do for you? But we don't have time to say what did happen and what's going to happen. Again, it's a tough bargain, but and there are no easy shortcuts to affect changes in the region. So, we need to have patience and respect for what is going on in the region. It should take its time. I think we can have a big role, facilitating role, but that's it. And we need to have respect for regional dynamics, because that should play itself out. Fourthly is learning from local actors. Again, going back to my first point on our thinking about region. We always thought, usually when we worked with social actors in the region, it doesn't apply only to Hivos, but to different donors. Usually we used to work with our, like-minded, secular, usual suspects, individuals or organizations. and we always thought, you know, when we used to focus on the capital, and usually we don't go out to the countryside, right? And we don't have that much engagement with local communities living in remote areas. But here we are in Syria, and one of our partners in Syria the guy his name is Hassan, who recently fled to Lebanon. He's called the Encyclopedia of Syria. The guy knows a lot about Syria. He writes about Syria. He's a Syrian, but he said in a recent article, actually now I discover how ignorant I am about Syria. While even born and lived in Syria, because he said suddenly I see local communities coming out, demonstrating against Assad in areas where we never thought that there would be a revolution. So, need for some modesty, and we need also to learn from local actors and to think more about social change, how change happens in an authoritarian state, how does society react to authoritarian practices, and I think that is one of the main lessons of these revolutions. And fifth is, there has been a lot of talk about we need to engage with Islamists. Muslim Brotherhood being the main actor, not the only one. And again, we at Hivos also, we always called for engagement with the Islamists before the revolution because they are an important part of their society. True, but they were not the initiators of the revolutions. They are today in power in Egypt, in some other countries, but Muslim Brotherhood joined revolutions very lately. They were very cautious to join the revolution. Muslim Brotherhood is not a revolutionary movement, it's a reformist movement, right? So yes, we need to engage with them, but this means that, and we should not lose sight of the fact that in the aftermath of revolutions, when you have elections, usually not the revolutionaries who win elections, because in the case of Middle East, these were young people without, a lot of grassroots community support, but nonetheless, they were instrumental in bringing about the revolutions. But Muslim Brotherhood had the organization, has the financial capacity, so they were there, and they have a lot of experience, been working for 80 years in an authoritarian state, how to organize, they have money, so they managed to win the elections, but this is not the end of the world. We need to get engaged with them, but we should not get panicked when they win elections. And we need to get engaged with them, but, and this is a very important but, these revolutions are not, as sometimes portrayed, Islamic revolution. This is not Islamic Spring. This is not an Islamic Spring, despite the fact that they are now in power. Actually, this is a post-Islamist revolution. Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has zero vision about which Egypt they want, has zero programs how to deal with social political problems. They have no vision whatsoever, and they are struggling, right? And the Egyptian society is very strong, lively. I'm sure down the road there will be changes, in the next elections maybe. As a matter of fact, last year they won elections with the support of different groups who were opposed to the other candidate, which was from the Mubarak camp. But in the last 3 months, 3 important elections held in Egypt. Pharmacist election, students election for University Students Union, and journalist syndicates. They lost all 3 elections. This was not in the international media coverage about Egypt. It's really telling, right? Mm-hmm. My last point is that we discovered that support to human rights groups, and in particular liberal human rights democracy groups, is very important. We need to continue that, and we have to do that, but we should not forget that there is a lot of perceptions about foreign funding, particularly coming from Western countries, but also a lot of accusations, rightly I think, towards Qatar and Saudi Arabia, because they pour money in these countries to their favorite usual suspects. So my point is that we should address the perceptions where possible of this foreign funding dilemma, and because on the one hand there are genuine suspicions towards foreign funding, but there are also political instrumentalization of foreign funding. Recent example is the backlash towards civil society activists in Egypt, local and international, including some American Freedom House, some other organization, any day based in Cairo. So with that, I mean, I hope that I didn't take too much time.
Yeah.
I finished my talk, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would it be possible for you to just pass this around
Sure,
so we
sure.
might take a look
Absolutely.
at it? It
Absolutely.
would be very
Absolutely.
helpful.
And I have
Sure.
one also I can pass around
Sure.
this direction.
That would be terrific.
I guess I have a question about what happened in Tunisia and what's happening there now. Can we break it
Splendid.
down almost by country?
Right. I mean, more generally, or
Well, in terms of civil
in
society.
terms of civil society?
Yes.
Right. I mean, well, I think Tunisia has a very strong, civil society, particularly very strong liberal civil society organizations, individuals. It's got also, obviously, religious Islamist organizations. But what we see in Tunisia is that Tunisia could be the first real Arab democracy. Despite all the challenges right now, I think they have really good chances to become the first real democracy. And the next elections will be very crucial, very, very crucial. Because for the first time, the ruling Islamist Al-Nahda party has a real challenger, and that is Nida Tunis, which means in English the Tunisia calling. That is a coalition of secular, liberal organizations, and they really, I mean, the polls, they are ahead, the future calling. So when it comes to civil society, I think, as I said, women movement in Tunisia is very strong, very, very strong. We have a very strong labor union in Tunisia, which was actually the dynamo of this Tunisian revolution, and it's still there. There are challenges from the side of another party, but also from a very small but very destructive Salafist group. I mean, they are terrorist groups, right? And they could be, they are a real challenge, as we know. I mean, they attacked some Western interest in Tunisia.
Right.
So, I mean, those challenges are there, but I think Tunisian society is very vibrant, is very vital. And the fact that last year a famous leftist politician was assassinated by a Salafist group, I was actually, I mean, even some of our Tunisian colleagues, they were so scared that there might be even massacres in Tunisia, right? Thank God it didn't happen. Both camps, Islamist and secular, managed to channel the frustrations. So that's Tunisia. Egypt, it's very tough. The transition in Egypt is really very tough, and I think particularly the liberal secular. I mean, they don't call themselves secular because that is a very sensitive word in Egypt. They call themselves civil groups. They are quite frustrated because, I mean, it's easy for us from here to write about it, but it's something else to be an activist who made the revolution and see in front of your eyes a completely different group in power, which is not your favorite. It's very tough. But we have to go back to the French Revolution, and we know that it takes time. So sometimes I say 2011 is 1789. But it took 10 years. We had really tough times in France too, and look at other revolutions. And the most important thing is that the fear factor has collapsed for once and for all. And people are now have their dignity, they want their rights, but it will take time, and there will be certainly backlashes. Some countries maybe even fragment, but that's how things should be. I mean, in the past, the so-called stability, it was never a stability. It was a simmering stability.
Audley, I think you were next.
Yes.
And then Peg, and then Camellia.
Okay, Mr. Hassan, thank you very much for your presentation, very informative. I just have a comment and a question. Let me get to the question first. What really happened to the revolutionary movement in Bahrain? I mean, it seems to have died a natural death. And secondly, my comment. You started by talking about the French Revolution. What I find with democracy, it's a process, especially in the West. It started with Magna Carta in the 13th century, evolved through the Glorious Revolution in England in the 1680s, then through the American Revolution, then through the French Revolution. and the multiplicity of revolutions, the 1840s in Europe, finally the Russian Revolution, all these revolutions, it took time for Western democracy to develop. Why should you think that's going to be any different for the Middle East and North Africa?
Right. Can I?
Please,
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
please, we'll do
Thank
one
you.
at a time.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, I think first of all, what happened to the Bahraini Revolution? Excellent question, and I think it's some people say it's kicking alive. It's been suppressed, but what we see actually in Bahrain, even in Manama, very lastly, I mean, there were demonstrations, and not 200 people, tens of thousands of people coming out and demonstrate against the ruling family. It has been suppressed for now, and I have to say that the role of U.S. has not been absolutely constructive when it comes to the Bahrain Revolution, while it was very constructive in the case of Libya, right? I mean, Bahrain is where the Sixth Fleet is there, right? Bahrain is very strategic for Saudi Arabia, for the Gulf region, and for U.S. And in the background, it was the role of U.S. and Saudi Arabia, which is a strategic partner of U.S., which was very instrumental in suppressing the Bahraini Revolution. And I mean, Bahrain is a case where really you see strategic interest and aims of revolutionary people collide. Syria is another example, actually, you know, where you see the daily slaughter, but still international paralysis. Mainly because of Russia and China, but also because of lack of strategic action from the part of the US administration. So I would say, yes, it has been suppressed for now, but the genie is after the bottle, and that is, I think, the most important thing. Democracy is a process, absolutely. I don't think I said the transitions in Middle East would be different from what we witness in the West. Of course, every region has its own peculiarities and you know, the context. And I mean, in some respect, they are comparable. In other respects, maybe not. I think we definitely it will take time, because you know, I mean, it's one thing to have a revolution, but it's another thing completely to have a cultural revolution within society. I mean, it's easier to remove a dictator than to remove a culture of dictatorship, authoritarianism. That's a tough job. And we don't know how long it will take. We don't know when the next backlash would be. What we know is that there will be progress and there will be backlash, right? And there are counter-revolutions. There will be counter-revolutions, absolutely. But I think what we need is and they will have their own ways of transitions, which will, as I said, it's very peculiar to the country where transitions take place. But I think what is important is that what I try to also convey in Washington and in some other contacts, I mean, I belong to when talking about Middle East nowadays, you've got two camps, broadly speaking, maybe a bit exaggerated, the optimist and the pessimist, right? I am absolutely in the optimist camp, right? I mean, so I might prove wrong, who knows? I mean, but I think judging by what I know about the region, my modest knowledge coming from the region, seeing the revolutionary changes in the region, we should be optimist, but again, very realist, and be not romanticize societies, because societies have authoritarianism as states are actually, and it applies to all societies.
Peg.
So, and thank you again for joining us tonight. Speaking of cultural revolution, and I wonder if you could say more about the outlook for and the role of women in these regions. That seems like a real barometer of change.
Well, you know, women's rights is one of the core things which Hivos actually care about, and it's what we call one of our Hivos DNAs, we call it even. I mean, women's rights is at the core of Hivos. Next to other rights like LGBT communities, gay communities, I mean, very few organizations really very vocally support LGBT groups. We do that at Hivos, and we are very proud of that. And also in Middle East, but I mean, we just started linking these groups together. And as you know, it's a taboo in Middle East, but it's taboo in a lot of other countries, right? Women's rights, yes, there are backlashes, certainly in Egypt. There were some attempts to regress rights in Tunisia, but I think they failed. I think what we see about when it comes to women's rights is that at the time of revolution in Tahrir Square, you had really this joining of women and men together. I mean, some Egyptian partners say we were never so free when we were never so free as the days in Tahrir Square, because those are the moments of revolutions and people come together, right?
So now it's very treacherous for women to go there now.
Yes, and what you see, I mean, is that in the immediate aftermath of revolution, you see straight away a counter-revolution to women's rights. Huh? You see that in Syria. There are some attempts, surely in Egypt, and we should be very vigilant. We should be very vigilant, and we must support groups which strive for women's rights in the region. And again, but we should not, we should have also hope in the activists of the region who in difficult situations really strive for their rights. And what we are doing at Hivos is that we have learned a lot from Egypt. So right now we work with Syrian activists, our partners in Syria, inside Syria, to prepare their vision for post-Assad Syria, in which they lay out completely their rights right now and not later on, because otherwise it will be too late.
Camelia?
Sure. So I had a couple questions. Speaking about sort of now, we're transitioning from sort of democracy making to, we have these democratic societies that are engaging in democratic activities. What are the things that, I'm thinking like State Department, that we should be keeping in mind when we look at how we fund these organizations? Like, what are the metrics for success, so to say, that we sort of to look at how these organizations are working, given that everything's sort of in transition? That's my first question.
So could you please just repeat the first
Sure.
one? Again, one, sorry.
Sure. So kind of just what you had said, that it's sort of now we're not funding these democracy-making
Democracy promotion.
Promotion,
Right.
excuse me. Yeah, promotion. But it's more towards these organizations that are already working, and
Right.
what's their role? I guess is what I'm asking.
The role of these organizations
Yes.
in the region.
Yes.
Okay.
Now that we're, how do we, how can we sort of
Right.
as a, even through funding, like how do you support them, and what is the end goal?
Right.
Given that so many things are in transition.
Right.
My second question is thinking about sort of, this is a little bit off topic, but looking at the refugee crisis that's been happening in the Middle East, and how that's sort of going to destabilize some currently stable countries, and what does the international community need to do to sort of ensure that there is sort of a long-term strategy with either re-assimilating back into the countries, or what is the role of refugees and how they're going to play in the Middle East. And finally, I would just be curious to hear your thoughts also about sort of Afghanistan in 2016, and maybe also Iran in the upcoming election too.
Well,
Any thoughts
thank
on
you
that?
very much.
And I think we'll do this a little quickly.
It's a little bit, yeah, a
Because
lot.
that really spread, and you
Yeah.
are going to meet after
Yes,
at
definitely.
7:30, so
Sure,
if
sure.
it doesn't all get answered in
Okay.
the next 5 minutes,
Right.
we should just go ahead and
Right. I
say,
hope I understood
continue
your first,
after.
Sorry.
I hope I understood your first question correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong. How can we support? What I argued for is that leaving behind the paradigm of democracy promotion,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we should not support. And having patience is not the same as inaction, right?
Yeah.
So we need to continue to support human rights, whoever strives for global human rights, from whatever background, right? We need to engage with different actors in the society to understand the pulse of the society, which means religious and secular, whatever they call themselves, secular, civil, whatever. Which means that, and I think this is important, I hope this is the answer for your question. In the past, we thought always in terms of projects. In the NGO community, it's called projectization, projectification, which means that you say, here's a problem, this is my project, program, whatever, this is my plan, and if you implement it, then you're done. You achieved your aim.
Yes.
Reality doesn't work like that. You always need to have what I call a narrative story behind LFA, local framework analysis. You need to have a narrative about change, and that is, I think, it's very important. And for that, I think what we need is that, and I paraphrase a scholar from Paris. He wrote about the need to engage with all actors. So he said, you know, in the aftermath of these revolutions, what is important is not participants, but the process itself. And last year I was in Tunisia. I was the president of Arab Human Rights Institute said something which I will keep. I mean, it reverberates in my mind for the rest of my life. And he said, you know what? Don't support projects, support processes. And I challenged him how to support a process. And we don't have easy answers to that yet. And we need to, I think, which means that, you know, how to support a process is to have, to support different groups, to have an inclusive role, bring different groups together, but where fundamental human rights are threatened, like women's rights in a country, we can't, you know, I mean, we should act and we support the group which is persecuted, and I think it's not a really satisfying answer, but right. Yeah, refugee crisis, a very important issue, and we started working on a paper on refugee crisis in Syria to find out what are the implications for regional order. And I mean, it's what we see in Syria as it's not a crisis, it's a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe for the people who are affected, first and foremost, but also with far-reaching impacts for the entire region. And I have to be honest with you, I mean, we have to wait for the findings of this paper, and I will share it with you once it's out. Afghanistan, I have to admit that I wrote my thesis about Afghanistan back in 2002, sorry. I went to Afghanistan, to Kabul for 3 weeks to work on my thesis on the DDR, disarmament, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of ex-combatants. And so since then, I didn't have really that, and I don't have that much knowledge on Afghanistan, so I'm afraid that I can't really give an answer. You know, I mean, I didn't really update my knowledge about Afghanistan these days is what I call newspapers knowledge.
Look, I'm going to thank you for everything that you have given us tonight. I think that we'll continue the conversation amongst ourselves and find a way. I mean, Peter is teaching at Adelphi. We all have a role and an important one, and one of interest in this. So let's keep up a conversation and find a way to do it. And I'm going to allow you to just go ahead and meet afterward, and I'm going to be sorry I'm not there. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We really appreciate your speaking with us this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I?
Of course.
Thank you so much.